On today's post-election show, we're obviously going to talk about the election, right? Trump's win, Kamala's meltdown, how the Senate and House races are shaping up, and then, what comes next. Let's do it. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher. I'm a political junkie, so you don't necessarily have to be. Although I was not as much of a political junkie last night as I normally am on election day, because in case you don't follow on Instagram, I woke up vomiting at 5 a.m. yesterday. So I wake up with some sort of stomach bug and tried to sleep it off most of the day, and then got into looking at election stuff. But by about like midnight, 12:30, it was pretty obvious that things were leaning Trump's way for sure, and we wouldn't know much more for a couple hours. So it wasn't until 4 in the morning that I saw. I just happened to wake up, check my phone, and NBC had just called Pennsylvania for Trump, which basically was like, hey, with Alaska, which he will definitely win, he's got 270. So this is basically over. And within the next couple minutes, they called Wisconsin as well. So we don't have all the states yet. We don't know Nevada, Arizona, Alaska, or Michigan yet, but Trump is leading all of them. Oh, I guess technically we don't know Maine either. So if that's right, yeah, we don't know Maine either. So, but Maine's going blue. But it does look, Trump's leading in the other one. So it does look like Trump swept the swing states, which I said was possible. The polls were, we'll get into the polls in a second, but within the margin of error, it was a toss-up race. I said either one of these candidates could win all 7 swing states, or they could split them. There was nothing indicating one way or the other. Does that mean the polls were right? Does that mean they were wrong? I'm going to have someone on next week to talk about polling specifically, so we'll get into the weeds of polling then, because obviously people have lost a lot of trust in polling since now we've had 3 elections in a row where they underestimated Trump's support. And they can't seem to fix that problem. The polls were all within the margin of error, but that doesn't mean a lot when they've got, Kamala Harris up in most of the states. The final polls, I believe, had her up in a few of the states. Michigan, was Wisconsin specifically. So, they were within the margin of error, but still undercounting Trump supporters, because Trump actually won most of these states pretty handily. Certainly not like 1-point races or less than 1-point races like we saw in 2020. So in 2020, for example, Georgia, Biden wins by 12,000 votes. I think he wins Pennsylvania by 80,000 votes. These were really close races. They were all within sometimes the margin of error for them to do automatic recounts in some of these states. That did not happen in this election. Donald Trump won Pennsylvania right now 50 to 48, so by 2 points. That's it's like 150,000 votes. So it's more than the last time. And obviously that flips too, because Biden won that last time. So, Kamala Harris had to win the blue wall to win last night, and she didn't just not win the blue wall, she did not win a single swing state. So Trump's going to win not only the Electoral College, but to progressives and Democrats' dismay, he's also going to win the popular vote, which has not happened since 2004 for a Republican. Now, these history things are always kind of silly. George Bush won the popular vote and the Electoral College in 2000. He did not win the popular vote in 2004, but he won the Electoral College. And then Trump obviously won in 2016 without winning the popular vote as well. So in 2 of the 3 Republican won elections in since 2000, Republicans had not won the popular vote. It was a big, big deal in a way to delegitimize the Electoral College. I'm curious how they're going to manage to do that now, because if Trump wins the popular vote and the Electoral College, it's a little harder to vilify it. And I think it's obvious that popular vote doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not how we measure the presidential contest anyway. And Democrats just assume they have a permanent hold on the popular vote, but they don't. They clearly don't. And they didn't just lose the popular vote. They lost it to Donald Trump. So it's not a great look for them. So he sweeps the swing states. It does appear that Trump's campaign's plan to turn out more rural voters than in 2020, like at higher percentages, worked. He didn't really go after the suburban or the urban vote, short of some of the young vote that he went after, young men specifically. But that was more targeted at that demographic of young men, especially young men who didn't vote in 2020 or 2022, 2022 being the midterms. So, I don't trust, you're going to see a bunch of stuff that says exit polls say this. Here's my thing. I don't trust exit polls. They're wrong almost all the time. There are so many situations where the exit polls look one way, especially on election night, the way they're talking about exit polls. Now we'll see what polling happens after this, and we'll see if any of it's accurate. So we don't know at this point if he did overperform with those low propensity voters who didn't vote in 2020, didn't vote in 2022, but did they show up for Trump this time? I haven't seen the evidence that that's what happened. It just seems like in every state, his percentages were higher in the rural areas than they were in 2020 when he lost. And so the goal was basically run up the score in the rural counties so that she has to really overperform Biden in the urban counties and the suburban counties. And Kamala just did not crank up her turnout in those suburban or urban areas to counter it. It was higher in some of those areas than Biden's was, but not high enough to offset Trump's gains in the rural areas. And that's in Pennsylvania, that's in Michigan and Wisconsin, that's certainly in Georgia and North Carolina. There was a lot of concern with the hurricanes specifically that went through North Carolina that some of those rural areas would have trouble voting specifically. It's, if your home's gone, it's a little hard to, do voting because it's like you can't mail me a ballot. I got to go to a polling place. Is the polling place still there? So, but it does seem like the North Carolina election went fine. It doesn't seem like it affected it. So that's good. I'm glad that's the case. But I think the hope in North Carolina for Democrats specifically was they were hoping those rural areas would be more affected and by the hurricane specific. Not hoping, and that's a wrong way of saying. Just looking at the map and looking at the reality of the situation. But the blue areas of North Carolina were less affected by the hurricanes. And obviously it's a lot easier to, even if you have the damage in the urban area, it's a lot easier to run an urban election than it is rural ones in the sense that they're less spread out. So if you have a problem with a polling place, you can find another polling place really easily. That it's not as likely in a rural area. So it doesn't matter because Trump won North Carolina. It doesn't matter because he won Georgia. So, we've got all these situations where there's no evidence that Kamala outperformed Biden anywhere, really, in any sort of significant way. And so I think that this proves, which is what I've been saying all along, and I'm not good at predicting these things. And going into this, I really said it was toss-up. I really did not. I had a feeling Trump had a little bit of an edge in the last week just because all of the talk about Kamala's sort of momentum at the end didn't seem very real. It was like one poll in Iowa from a good poller, but it didn't seem to really be, it seemed like an outlier, but the media ran with it. It seemed like the media was trying to run with the narrative that Kamala was gaining momentum in this last week and that like the Puerto Rican garbage stuff actually mattered. It doesn't appear that mattered in Florida, at least, where there are a lot of Puerto Ricans. And so, I think these are kind of important things to look at because she didn't, I think this just proves that like my point all along was that Biden was incredibly unpopular. His administration is incredibly unpopular. As much as Democrats want to pretend that he's been a consequential president and so great, it's lip service to a guy with a huge ego is really what it is. It's not real. Americans don't feel that way. And look, Americans can be wrong about stuff. They think Donald Trump is fit to be president, obviously. I don't. I think that's a gamble. I do wonder how many people said, I'm picking the lesser of two evils, and I'm hoping that he governs in the way he did in his first term and hires good people. I still don't see there's a lot of chance of that happening, but, I think he's learned his lesson to not hire people that will say no to him. But, I just don't think that there was any evidence that there was momentum, and it's clear that people don't like the Biden-Harris administration. Now, are they being totally fair? I don't know. I think they are because I think that the Biden administration has been a disaster for most of the things that voters in America care about, and she could not manage to talk about the things that they cared about. So I think people don't trust her because she's in the administration. I think the biggest problem for the administration was the cover-up of Biden's age. I think that was frankly the big problem. there's this sort of, if you make that big of a lie and a cover up of the coordination that goes into it, of the vice president, everyone around him, celebrities, the media, people are writing all these things about, this is fake news. This is deep fake stuff about Biden's age. This is selective editing of clips of him. This is not real. And then the debate happens and all hell breaks loose. They can't cover it up anymore. I think that that is the key. That's the linchpin in this whole thing, because how do you trust Kamala Harris, who was part of that cover up? And the fact that she never really got asked that question of, she sort of did, but she dodged it, and she claimed that she was with all of Biden's decisions. I think it was bad. We'll get to what all she did that was really bad in a moment. I do want to talk about Trump for a second. So, going back to that Iowa poll that Democrats and the media sort of put their hope in the last week, that Iowa poll had Harris winning 47-44. Now, there was like an 8% undecided in her poll still. But Trump ends up winning the state by 12 or 14 points. So that poll is massively wrong. It's not margin of error wrong. That is a bad poll. And, Democrats are probably understandably pissed about the polling. I still think, like I said, we'll talk about it next week. I think that they were largely within the margin of error. It is correct, though, that they underestimated Trump. So, it turns out I was wrong about the ground game. I did not think Trump had the better ground game, and I thought women were more reliable voters for Kamala. That's why I thought she might win. Those were the edges I gave her. The edge I gave him is just that Biden and Harris are so incredibly unpopular that I think that they will put Donald Trump back in the White House to say, get rid of these people. So, it's just like, who's going to turn out more of those two groups of people? And it's obviously apparent now that it was the anti Kamala Harris and Biden and Democrats people that they showed up, and the suburban people and the urban voters. And the problem with the Democratic coalition at this point is it's not this big tent like it was before. It's like all college educated. The women in it are mostly single women. Married women go way more for Republicans in general than single ones. People with families tend to go Republican. So they're losing some demographics, which will be interesting to see. So let's talk about what Kamala did wrong, because I think that this is going to be fun to unpack for a long time. I've said from the beginning I thought she was the worst possible choice. I've said that from before the debate with Biden crashing and burning. I've said that, look, people know that a vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris as taking his place in this next term. And I think people don't like her. She was incredibly unpopular the whole time she was vice president. She basically had the same tanked numbers that Biden did after the Afghanistan withdrawal. So she had bad numbers, and part of the, Democrats are fully, Democrats are fully to blame here. There is no situation where they're not to blame. For example, so last night on CNN, basically Trump did better in every state, like we said, which I think proves that the Biden-Harris administration is very unpopular. CNN showed a map of everywhere that she did 3 points or more better than Biden in 2020. There are 0 states that she did that in. Then Jake Tapper asked John King to show, okay, well, let's see the counties that she did better. There are only 58 counties in the entire country that she did better than Joe Biden in. That's pretty bad. So who's to blame? Who's to blame for her loss? Because I do think I still boil this down to, I've said the whole time, I really thought that this was someone's election to lose, not that someone would win the election. I'm not giving Trump credit. I'm just saying Kamala Harris could have won this election, I think, potentially, if she had done a few things, specifically throw Joe Biden under the bus. So let's start with him. Joe Biden deserves a mountain of blame for this from Democrats. I think it will tarnish his legacy for forever with Democrats, and it should. He, despite running in 2020 on basically saying he was going to be a bridge to the next generation, he sticks around and he just decides, I'm running for a second term, even though we can all see with our own eyes that he's too old to do this. And he goes with it. Well, the problem is not just Joe Biden, though, because all the Democrats in the media got right behind him and lied about it and gaslighted us. I hate using the term gaslight, but this is the perfect example of gaslighting, telling us that we shouldn't believe our own eyes in years when we see him talk and walk and things like that. I'm still saying he should not be the president right this moment. I think Kamala Harris should be the president right now for the next few months, 2-3 months, whatever it is, till January 20th. I really do not think. Plus, that would really screw up all the 47 stuff for the Trump year, which would be kind of fun because he'd really be the 48th president. Then it would just be kind of funny. I mean, that's not going to happen. But I don't think Biden has the wherewithal to be the president right now. And people scoff at that when I say it. But I'm like, why do you think he does? Like, what makes you think he's capable of doing this job? I mean, he called Trump supporters garbage last week. He can't even stay on message for Kamala Harris. So Biden is squarely to blame for staying in the race. Because if he would have, after the 2022 midterm, said, you know what, I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to be a bridge to the next generation. I'm not going to run again. So Democrats, have your open primary. There's not a chance that Kamala Harris wins that open primary. There's not a chance. She's not popular enough. She's too progressive. Her 2019 stuff is way too hard to reverse. Her ban fracking and let's confiscate all guns and let's ban AR, or not confiscate all guns. I guess she just wanted to confiscate AR-15s, but whatever. Healthcare for all, transgender surgeries for illegal immigrants in jail. There's all these crazy things that she had positions on in 2019 that were really hard for her to stray from. So I just don't believe she would have won that. I don't think she would have won that primary. So Biden's to blame for that. But you know what? Kamala Harris deserves the blame, and all Democrats in the media for covering it up. Because what did they think was going to happen? I guess they just thought Joe Biden, they could fake it for long enough to get Joe Biden elected, and then, oh, it's fine. We've got Kamala in the wings. She can take over. Nikki Haley was right in the primary when she said that a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. She is going to be the president sometime in the next term. And, I am very interested to see what Biden's decline looks like over the next 4 years. I think that it will prove that the people that thought he was too old to be the president were correct. So Biden is going to have a lot of blame. I do not expect to hear as many people claiming that he was a consequential president after the election when they lost. I think that was, again, a bunch of BS in the media and the Democrats trying to stay united and trying to help his fragile ego. The truth is Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the same sort of egomaniacs who have vast insecurities about their intellect. I think that they're more similar than people realize. And to me, it's just clearly very selfish of him. And it's also very clear that you don't really think that Donald Trump is the existential threat to the country that you think he is by staying in the race as long as he did. And by trying to do the debate. I mean, he was losing in the polls already. Biden would have lost this election maybe even worse than Kamala Harris did. Now, I think it's like, so it's no wonder that the American people didn't trust Kamala because she was in on that lie. And she never distanced herself from a single policy that Biden. So you've got the combination of Biden's policies are very unpopular, and she says, I would have done all the same things. Combined with Biden's too old to run for president again, but I didn't say anything. How are you going to overcome that? So I do think Kamala missed an opportunity to throw him under the bus. And this is something that she could have talked to him about. She could have been like, look, if Donald Trump is the threat we say he is, we have to do whatever we have to do to win. And right now you are very, very unpopular, and I have to throw that albatross off my neck of you. But know that there's no real hard feelings. I love you, whatever. I mean, you can puff them up however you want to. But you got to say, look, I've got to distance myself from you in some ways. I've got to call out the mistakes you made. I've got to say, I would have done something different. And to me, it was such an easy play to do because everyone knows the vice president is not that important. They really only have a couple of constitutional duties. It's break a tie in a Senate vote and invoke the 25th Amendment. She did the first part a lot. She broke the tie a lot in the 50-50 Senate that Democrats had in 2020 when Biden got elected. I think she should have invoked the 25th Amendment. I think she still should. Won't happen, but if she's not going to do any of the things that show I'm going to distance myself from the very unpopular president and administration that I'm in currently, people just didn't buy it. I also think that there are some other things that potentially affected this. I don't have any real evidence of this. Tim Walz was obviously a bad pick. It's not apparent that picking someone like Josh Shapiro would have won her since she lost every swing state and you're only looking at Pennsylvania. Trump still wins this race if Pennsylvania doesn't go to him because he's winning Michigan and Wisconsin. All the other swing states he's winning. So he could actually stand to lose it if he won all those other swing states. I still think that was a foolish mistake to try to appease. It's not just that she didn't pick Josh Shapiro. I think it's pretty clear the message was she's trying to appease the, if we want to call them pro-Palestinian, some of them are pro-Hamas, some of them are very anti-Israel, I think borderline anti-Semitic. I think the Democratic Party has a lot to deal with there. And I do think that's a problem. I think it looks like in Michigan, where she was most concerned about some of those voters, it looks like those voters voted for third-party candidates like Jill Stein. It doesn't look like they voted for either one of them. So I think those votes were lost no matter what, she said. So she might as well have backed Israel fully, because that's where most of the country is. Something like 60% of the country says, we think we're doing enough or should do more. And so most of the country feels that way, and she was catering to the 30% of the country that thinks we should abandon Israel. That doesn't make a lot of sense politically for me, but that's where the base of her party is. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where the parties are having to cater to the fringy bases of their party to win primaries. And therefore, they are losing some general election voters who are just holding their nose and picking one of the two. But it's obviously that of all the people, independents, disaffected Democrats, disaffected Republicans, most of them held their nose and voted for Donald Trump. And so you failed at convincing people that you were the better choice, and which is absolutely insane considering it is Donald Trump. I think that any Republican could have beat Kamala Harris for sure. I think if Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or Chris Christie, I think any of them would have walloped her, because this is pretty clearly a referendum on the Biden-Harris administration, which was not popular. So I'm pretty confident any Republican would beat them, but Donald Trump was the most beatable Republican in that primary field, and Republicans chose him, which we'll talk about too. But I just think it's that is proof that Kamala lost this election. And maybe that's not entirely her fault, because maybe that's, like I said, it's a lot of Biden's fault. It's a lot of the party's fault. It's a lot of things that were outside of her control in some ways. The unpopularity of the Biden administration is not really her fault. The vice president really doesn't do a lot. I think we'll hear a lot more about the fights. I think we'll probably see a pretty public breakup of the two of them after Trump is inaugurated. I think it's going to be ugly for Democrats. I also think the biggest problem that Kamala had was not being authentic. I said last night in the Instagram thing, someone asked me to say something positive about both candidates, which is hard to do. I said Donald Trump's key factor is that he's authentic. He is 100% Donald Trump. He never pretends to be anyone else. Even the McDonald's thing. He shows up in a suit and tie, takes the jacket off, puts the apron on over the tie and the suit that I'm sure costs more than the combined hourly wages of everyone else that works at that McDonald's. And it's because he doesn't try to pretend to be a working man. He doesn't try, he's authentic. Now, I think he's a BSer and he lies a lot. And obviously the 2020 election was not stolen. He continues to claim, which let's talk about that for just 1 second. I think quick caveat. For anyone that believes that the 2020 election was stolen, for anyone that still believes that, which I assume are probably not listening to this, but if they are, I want to ask why you think, or why anyone thinks, that in 2020, when Republicans controlled the government, okay, they controlled the White House, they controlled the Justice Department, they didn't have the Senate and the House at that point, but so 2020, they have most of the mechanism of the federal government and the weight of Donald Trump being the president. And the theory is that Democrats nefariously stole the election. Okay? That's the theory, right? How did they do that in 2020 but not manage to do it in 2024 when they have the White House, they have the Senate, they have the Justice Department, they have all the things that Trump had in 2020, but didn't utilize any of that stuff to pull off the vast conspiracy to steal this election? Why would you steal the 2021 but not the 2024 one? The only explanation MAGA people are going to come up with is, well, it was like too big to steal. Well, no, not really. It really wasn't too big to steal. I mean, yeah, he won by bigger margins than Biden did in 2020. But, if the theory that Trump is peddling and all his followers is that millions of illegal aliens are going to vote in this election, millions of vote can definitely swing it. He's winning the popular vote by several million votes, but you don't have to have all those popular votes. You just have to win some of the states. So if Democrats really had this effort and this coordinated effort, by the way, all without showing any evidence that any of this happened, because there's still no evidence that this happened. So why not steal the election in 2024? It just doesn't make any sense when you follow it, because they didn't steal the election in 2020. It's just true that people were tired of Trump in 2020, and then they got Biden and they realized, you know what, maybe Trump wasn't so bad. Maybe all his flaws are worth trading for this situation with the economy and the border and foreign policy, and just list all the things that people didn't like about the Biden administration. So, I do think I was probably, like I said, a little wrong on the walls thing, in the sense that it didn't help her at all, but picking someone like Josh Shapiro wouldn't have helped that much, because maybe she wins Pennsylvania. Although maybe not. I still think it's a bad choice. I still think it is definitely her fault for picking Walz. She lost Minnesota, or she won Minnesota. Sorry, she won Minnesota, but by less points than Biden did in 2020, which means she picked a Minnesota governor and did worse in Minnesota than that administration did in 2020. That's crazy to me. It's obviously that he was a bad choice, and I think it's the end of his and her political careers. I don't see either one of them doing anything for the Democratic Party going forward, because normally what parties do when someone loses is they go, all right, we're kind of done with you. Republicans did not do that with Trump in 2020. I think the Senate thought that would be the case, that voters would just reject him. And so they decided not to remove him from office when they had the choice. So that's Republican senators that we have to blame for this solely. We would not even have Trump running for president in 2024 if the Republicans in the Senate just would have done their job and done what they felt in their heart, but they just didn't do, because they didn't want to. They didn't want to deal with the short-term political consequences, which I think is a bad idea. So I think the other problem is that Kamala just didn't have any personality whatsoever that people trusted. She was different for everyone. I don't think Kamala Harris really knows who she is, because she lived in the world of California Democratic politics. She's never had to run against a Republican, really, in her life. She's ran in primaries. That's the competitive race in California. So she's dealing with like pretty far left Democrat stuff. So the only national office she ran for, obviously, was the president, and even her Senate race is in California. So when you're in that blue of a state, you don't even know how to talk to Republicans. And she needed those people. She needed people that voted for Trump in 2020 to vote for her. And I think she was such an unknown personality in all of this, in the sense that she wouldn't throw Joe Biden under the bus. She wouldn't distance himself at all from him. Although I'm sure if you could put truth serum in her, she would say differently. And so I don't think she's been honest. I think that people don't know who she is. And she kept talking about issues that, frankly, people did not care about. She went through this whole trouble of having people like Liz Cheney and all these Republicans endorse her, which I think was genuine. I think that we should be really concerned that hundreds of elected Republicans have said Donald Trump is not fit for office, and I'm endorsing the other candidate who is not good. She took that opportunity, and instead of then offering something to those conservatives or Republicans that would have maybe voted for her, she just follows it up with like, and that's why we're going to do healthcare for all. That's why we're going to do blah, blah, blah. Yeah, she tried to reverse her fracking ban and gun ban and all these kind of things. She tried to change her position on those, but she never explained why they changed. And the truth is they changed because Joe Biden said they had to change for her to be the vice president. That's why. It's politics. But that goes back to Biden. Biden could have picked a better VP candidate in 2020. This goes all the way back to playing to the identity politics of the left, of the fringiest versions of the left, which are less fringy than they used to be. And he chose to go that route. So in a primary where all the progressive people lost handily to Joe Biden, who ran as the normal centrist Democrat, in a primary full of people that thought the lesson learned from 2016 was we should be all in on the Democratic Socialist agenda. That's why Bernie Sanders almost beat Hillary Clinton. I don't believe that's why. I think it's because people like the authenticity of Bernie Sanders. So he caves to that pressure and he says, I'm going to pick a black woman for my vice president to get a pat on the back from the progressive left. If he would have picked someone like Cory Booker, I think is a better politician, he could have picked other minority women if he wanted to. I just think Kamala Harris was a uniquely bad choice for vice president. And, you just follow the thread. He picks her as vice president. He refuses to step down. He has the bad debate. She becomes the only person that can really be in the running. I think we will learn more about what really happened behind the scenes of that frantic nomination process. And I think people really didn't like, I don't have this problem, but I think people really didn't like that she was just selected and not elected. There was no democratic process. She was running for president of the United States without ever having really ran a race against a Republican. I think people really were bothered by that. Not just Democrats, but Republicans too. They're like, how can you say we're the party that wants to destroy democracy, but you didn't even let, constituents pick your nominee? Now, I actually don't think that holds water because no one else stepped up, first of all. Now, I think that there's probably a coordinated effort in the background of her trying to make sure no one stepped up. I think most people also realized the writing was on the wall, that this was going to be an uphill battle for Democrats. And why would Josh Shapiro or Gavin Newsom or any of these other people want to run in 2024 at the risk of losing when they can just wait 4 years? The truth is, politicians are politicians. They want to keep their jobs. They have aspirations. They have goals. And people like Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, other national Democrats, they want to run in 2028. That's the truth. So I don't think any of them wanted to step up to the plate to potentially lose a nomination when it wouldn't even necessarily be their fault. Now, I do think one of those Democrats could have done better than Kamala Harris because they could have distanced themselves more reasonably from that administration because they're not the sitting vice president. They can do so. So, I think that that's a huge problem for them, that no one else ran. I think people kind of thought of her as the potential sacrificial lamb. If she loses, we're rid of Kamala Harris and we get a whole new batch of Democrats in 2028. If she wins, great, we can deal with her. I think that was the gamble. I don't think that gamble paid off for the Democrats. So let's move on to the Senate and the House and talk about that for just a second, because Republicans did end up taking over more seats in the Senate than I think anyone really thought they would. So Cruz, first of all, in Texas, I should actually share my screen. If you are just listening, I'll try to not rely too much on the visuals. I just wanted to be able to show these numbers in case anyone cares. Let me zoom in a little bit on it too. Oh, that doesn't make it any bigger. That's annoying. Okay, so the other thing is that Democrats are fools. They believe everything that looks good for them and nothing that looks bad for them. So this is now 2 election cycles in a row, plus the governor's race in Texas, that Democrats have spent, I think Allred, his campaign spent $77 million in Texas to try to flip that Senate seat. Ted Cruz is an incredibly unpopular, even with the Republicans, senator. And so he does always have a chance to lose these races. So going into it, between the polls, I mean, we would see a poll that would show Colin Allred up against Ted Cruz. The media would go crazy with it. We're gonna change Texas blue. They did the same thing in Florida. They thought really they were safe. Most people knew that obviously West Virginia was going to change with Joe Manchin leaving. He was a Democrat in a very red state, so obviously a Republican won that seat. So they knew they were going to lose that. At that point, it'd be a tie. But, Republicans had a beneficial map, but they thought they could maybe offset Montana's potential loss with either a Texas or Florida win. Now, I truly believe that most of the smart people did not believe that. I talked about a couple weeks on the show, I think, or that might have been the other show I do, that Chuck Schumer's Senate super PAC that basically sends money to different Senate races that he feels is necessary. This last couple weeks ago, I think, only sent the Allred team $60,000. Meanwhile, he's sending tens of millions to other places. It was very obvious that the people that were actually looking at what was actually going to happen did not believe that Allred had a chance. Right now, with 97% of it in Texas. Oh, sorry, that's Trump. 53.2% to 44.5%. So right now, Cruz is winning by almost 7 points. I think that's double what he won by in his last Senate election against Beto O'Rourke. So Texas was nowhere near turning blue. And yet, Democrats spent hundreds of millions of dollars, actually, because that is Colin Allred's spending was his spending. That's not the PACs and stuff. So there's tons of money that Democrats send from outside the state and spend in Texas to not turn it blue. Maybe they should have spent that money on the Montana race or the Ohio race or the Pennsylvania race, because right now it looks like Republicans definitely flipped Ohio. They definitely flipped Montana. They definitely flipped West Virginia. They are in the lead in Pennsylvania and Nevada. If that happens, if they win those 2 states, they will have a 54 seat majority. So it'll be 54-46. That's significant. To me, that sort of further proves that this was more of a red wave across the board. So I anticipate that Republicans will also take, oh, by the way, Nebraska too. That was the other one. So a lot of people were really excited. Independents and Democrats really thought Deb Fischer, the incumbent in Nebraska, could lose to to Osborne, the independent. There were a few polls that showed that it could happen, but there wasn't a lot of polling. It was like internal polling from the campaigns, and they weren't, I don't think, super accurate. Well, she ends up winning Nebraska by 9 points, so not close at all. So she ends up winning by 9 points. That's pretty significant. So Nebraska, not a chance. And basically, Republicans ran the tables on most of these races. So they're going to have a big majority. I think the House will probably go the same way. I think it'll be a slimmer margin. I think we'll still have, no one's going to have a 40-seat majority or anything like that. We would know right now that we'd be calling the House for Republicans. The House takes a lot longer because there are obviously over 400 seats that they got to count. Every single House seat is up for election every 2 years. So the stuff I've read is like, it could be days, it could be weeks before we actually know who's going to control the House. But I don't see any evidence that there's not a red wave in the Senate and with Trump. And I haven't looked at governor races and stuff and those other kind of things, but I'd be pretty surprised if Republicans don't have the House and the Senate, which means Donald Trump will be able to do things he wants to legislatively. That might concern you. I'm less concerned about the congressional stuff because having to get buy-in from Congress, I think, is another thing. I think that those people need to be reelected, and so they will be more likely to weigh that in their decision to back, for example, if Donald Trump went to them to try to put tariffs on all imports, they're probably going to say no. However, they've kind of given up that authority to the president, so he can do that by himself. He doesn't need congressional buy-in, and we'll talk a little bit about that, about what's next. But so, Scott in Florida won by a larger margin than he did in 2020. He won by 13 points. So again, why are Democrats convinced that they can win Texas and Florida? Florida gets more and more red. Texas, I think, is only not deeply red because of Cruz. I think he's just a little unpopular. People don't like him. So again, Democrats buying into a narrative. Sometimes I wonder if everyone knows the Democrats. The media is in for the Democrats, no matter what. They're always willing to spin the positive story for Democrats and negative for Republicans. That's how it goes. Anyone that doesn't think that's happening, I just think that just look at the evidence. It's very obvious that there's a liberal bias. Part of that liberal bias, though, I don't think it's convincing normal Americans. I think that they go, well, you lied to us about the Hunter Biden laptop thing in 2020. You lied to us about a lot of COVID misinformation stuff that you guys, the media and Democrats, labeled as disinformation or misinformation that ended up being true. They've got like case after case. Biden's age is another thing. You've got case after case of things that you told us that did not end up being true. And I think it's lost the trust in the media. I think that's very obvious. I think the other thing it does that Democrats haven't realized is it gives them a false sense of hope. And it gives them a false positive sense that things are going well for them because their feedback loop is, well, there's no, they're in their little bubbles and they're then being told all that same bubble stuff by their media. So I actually think Democrats are not just hurt because the American public doesn't trust the media in general. I think that it also hurts because it gives those Democrats a false hope and it gives them an idea that, like, for example, they thought Kamala Harris had momentum this last week. It's very clear that she did not have any momentum this week. It's very clear that them trying to hype up. And I'm not saying the Puerto Rican garbage thing was not worth talking about. I think it was absolutely worth talking about. And I think it could have been something that hurt Trump. It didn't end up hurting Trump. I do think Biden's garbage comment might have actually helped Trump. I think that was potentially more consequential. Some stand-up comedian at the beginning of a Trump rally. Yeah, it was wrong. It was stupid. I'm actually less offended by the Puerto Rican garbage thing and more about his anti-Semitic stuff and his anti-black stuff. He's talking about black people carving watermelons and stuff. It's not a funny joke. Like, it's a stupid racist trope, and that's stupid. Why even have that guy come on stage? I agree, it is pretty foolish. But I think that Democrats really thought that these things were going to swing the momentum for them because no one in the media went, I'm skeptical. They just buy in on it because they think that maybe it'll help. So what happens next? This is really the question that everyone's going to get now because it's, what happens? Well, first of all, I don't think we're going to have a stolen election claim from the left. not because they are above it, but because it's just not close enough. Trump is winning by bigger margins than Biden did in 2020 or Trump did in 2016. So it's going to be pretty hard to claim that he's illegitimate. Now, does that mean they won't do that? No. I think that they will claim he's illegitimate just like they did in 2016. I hope that I hope the media and Democrats have learned their lesson to not fabricate stuff about Donald Trump, because the stuff that's bad about Donald Trump is already bad enough. You can just report the facts without having to use hyperbole or say he's a Russian asset or any of these other things that I think were provably not true. I think Donald Trump is dangerous. I don't like him any more than I did yesterday, but I also think that he gets exaggerated by the left. But we're gonna see that. Like it's not gonna be the end of democracy, but they're gonna claim that for the next 4 years. I mean, I'm already seeing article after article that you probably won't get to vote in 2028. I think that's outrageous. I've always thought that was outrageous. That comes from both sides, by the way. Donald Trump and his people have said the same thing. Elon Musk has said the same thing. You're not going to be able to vote in the next election if Kamala Harris wins. I think all that is ridiculous. It's sowing distrust in our election system. It's sowing distrust in our democracy. It's no wonder that 81% of Americans believe that American democracy is being threatened right now. That's how you do get into a civil war situation. If 81% of the country, 4/5 of the country, thinks that our democracy is being threatened, people do irrational things if they think democracy is being threatened. When we had the Civil War in the 1860s, there were people that decided we're going to fight for this because this is a big enough deal. So we've had a civil war in this country. I'm not saying we're heading for a civil war. Don't listen to what I'm not saying. I'm just saying that kind of rhetoric does lead to that kind of thing. When we're talking about slavery, that's probably something worth having a fight about. If half the country thinks we should have slaves and half of them don't, we gotta figure this out. That's a big deal. There's nothing of substance in either Kamala Harris's or Donald Trump's campaigns. People are mad about the economy. They're mad about inflation. They're mad about the border. They're mad about this kind of stuff. That's not Civil War level fight stuff, frankly. It's just not. So I wish people would tone down the rhetoric. I hope the left and the media tone it down this time and just report the bad stuff and the good stuff. Call balls and strikes. They probably won't do that, but that's what I think they should do. I think that Trump's election, I'm talking about the left right now, specifically reaction to him. I think Trump's election is going to increase progressive wokeness. What people don't often realize is that when a president gets elected or a party comes in power, even the vast majority of people that voted for them, sort of reflexively, I don't know if it's just our inherited lack of trust of people in power that Americans tend to have, like we immediately start rejecting the things sometimes that they campaigned on because there's a lot more resistance to the party in power. It's more vocal. It might not be a majority of the country, but think about every crazy woke story you ever heard. When did they happen? Between 2016 and 2020. That's when we had Black Lives Matter riots. That's when we had the start of the gender stuff and transitions for minors. And that's when every woke, crazy, progressive thing happened in those 4 years. It has slowly died off since. Most people aren't saying Latinx, and most people aren't, explicitly anti-Semitic. Obviously, there's parts of the left that are. So to me, a lot of the woke stuff will rear its ugly head again. Like I said, it might be a minority, but prepare for that. It's going to happen. There will be some of that. It will be cities, it will be states reflexively trying to be anti-Donald Trump. And instead of just being reasonable and anti-Trump, hey, I don't like his tariff policy. I think this is how we should do taxes, whatever. They go all in on the identity politics and that kind of stuff. So I do expect more of that to happen. I also expect there to be more anti-Semitism. I think that's going to rise just because now that Donald Trump is in charge, a lot of the left, you don't have to get into the weeds on the left to see the anti-Semitic stuff. You can read Slate or Daily Beast or Huffington Post, and you can read straight up calling Israel genocidal. I think is absolutely not provable. It's not true at all that they're genocidal. They have lower casualty rates of civilians than we do as a country when we were in places like Iraq and in Afghanistan. They have better track records of killing fewer civilians to combatants than any other country in the history of urban warfare. It's just not true that they're trying to kill a bunch of civilians. They're not genocidal, but you will find the word genocide on all of those left websites. That's going to ramp up. And it's also going to ramp up as obviously Israel is continuing to take out Hezbollah and Hamas and not paying attention to what Biden or Harris say. So I also expect, our enemies that were taking advantage of Biden's lack of willing to ever increase the chances of there being an escalation of some sort with Iran or Russia or China. I think it would not be surprising if those people try to do something in the next few months before he's out of office. We already got word yesterday that there were planned terrorist attacks from Russia on European airliners. So, you got to think, like, why is Putin doing that? Is it because he thinks he won't get a reaction from Europe or the United States, or he will from Europe, but not the United States won't back him? I don't know. I think Trump is more of a wild card when it comes to foreign policy, and I think people will not know what he's going to do, because I think that's pretty fair, actually, to say. I think most people don't know what he's going to do in a certain situation, and it changes day to day sometimes. So I think they'll try to take advantage of Trump not being the president for the next few months. I hope I'm wrong about that, but it's obvious that they have taken advantage of Biden being the president. So as far as Trump's stuff goes, I mean, be prepared for tariffs, because he can do that unilaterally. He doesn't really even need Congress. I'm curious to see who he hires. Does he hire adults again? My theory is that he won't. He's only going to hire sycophants that won't tell him no. I hope I'm wrong about that. I would love to be wrong about that, but I don't think I will be. So I think he will hire people that were only yes men, and they will give in to his worst instincts. I think he has bad instincts for the most part, and he was reined in by the people around him that told him, no, you can't just send the military out to shoot protesters in the leg. You can't, that's illegal. He had people around him telling him, no, you can't do that, or you can't say that, or this is bad. I don't know that there's going to be anyone in there like that now. I'm worried about our foreign policy. I'm worried about, I think Ukraine's finished. I'm worried about even how he supports Israel. There's a really big chunk of the right now that is very America first, very nationalist, doesn't want to do anything with any other country. If you combine the tariffs on every import that comes in the country, which will have retaliatory tariffs too, you're going to mess up the economy, and you're going to make us isolated economically, which is bad for American businesses, by the way. We export a ton of stuff. Those will go away if you have bad tariffs. If you have tariffs that are retaliatory, which there will be retaliatory tariffs, Trump just likes to pretend there won't be, we'll be isolated economically. And I think it's pretty obvious from J.D. Vance's talk, especially, who is certainly smarter and more coherent than Trump, that's where that's where Trump and Vance are promising to go. We are going to be isolationist across the board. I think that's bad. I think the world needs a strong America that backs its allies 100%. I think that that's what's kept the peace for the most part since World War II. And I think that if that goes away, all bets are off. The next president, Donald Trump, is going to deal with foreign policy problems. He's going to deal with Israel. He's going to deal with Russia, Ukraine. He's going to deal with China. He's going to deal with Iran. He is going to have foreign policy problems. If all of those, he says, we're just not going to meddle, we're not going to do anything, and he abandons Israel, he abandons Ukraine, he abandons Taiwan, if he continues to allow Iran to do the stuff they're doing, I think that's bad for America. I think it's bad for the world. I think it's bad for NATO. I think it's bad for Europe. I think if he abandons Ukraine and then Ukraine has to come to some deal with Russia, if Russia would even do that, then Russia's close to the border of NATO nations. Does that mean Trump talks a lot of game about NATO, but will he really drop out of NATO? I don't know. I think these are bad things that he could potentially do. I hope he surrounds himself with people that will tell him that those are bad ideas. I just don't foresee that happening when his own vice president is all in on that rhetoric too. Now, J.D. Vance, we don't really know who he is because he's a chameleon. He was different in 2016 than he was in 2018, than he was in 2020, than he was in 2024. But he's a smart guy. It bothers me that I know he knows he's lying about stuff that he's willing to lie about. And he's willing to say things, like I said, that if the Supreme Court rules something that Trump doesn't like, his suggestion is to just ignore it and say, good luck, enforce it. I think that's a terrible anti-democracy and anti-constitutional problem. I think that's a huge problem that Trump and his VP are promising, that if they get a court thing that they don't like, court decision they don't like, they'll just ignore it. I mean, to be fair, Biden's been doing the same thing. I'm not saying it's unique to Trump, but it does worry me if we go further down that road. So like I said, it's not the end of democracy. I do not think that there won't be an election in 2026 or 2028. I think it's ridiculous. I think that the more likely scenario is there's an election in 2026 and Democrats take the House and the Senate, like almost every first 2 years of a presidential term happens. It just pretty historically happens. Didn't happen in 2022 because Donald Trump put a bunch of bad candidates out, and so we had the House but not the Senate. So that's the rare example though of that, or exception of that happening. So I just think that we'll see. We'll see who he hires. We'll see how his administration comes together. But don't buy, I mean, he's dangerous. Don't get me wrong. I've said that. I think that he has a lot of bad ideas. Even if you take away all the like stolen election stuff and the January 6th stuff and his really bad behavior and his moral reprehensibility and all these kind of things, take away all that. His tariff thing is a terrible idea. It will hurt the United States economy. I hope someone talks him out of doing across the board 10 or 20% tariffs. I think that's a bad idea. I think it will hurt the economy. I think it will hurt the very people that voted for him. So, I hope he hires people around him that will tell him those things and say, hey, we've looked at the data and it looks like this will be bad for you and us. Now, Trump's not going to care. He doesn't have to get reelected, so he can kind of do whatever he wants. You can either be a lame duck immediately, but I mean, he will not be a lame duck for 2 years. He's going to have the House and the Senate probably. He has the Senate for sure. He'll probably have the House. So he will get some legislative stuff done. I expect the tax cuts to be permanent that he did in 2017. I think that's pretty safe. I'm curious to see if there's an actual border bill or if he just does it all with executive orders. I hope there's an actual border bill because I'm tired of this going back and forth between executive orders. Like Trump closes the border, Biden opens the border. We're not getting a say in that as Americans. That should be Congress's job. That's Congress's fault for abdicating that power to them. But so I do hope we get a border bill. Maybe the James Langford that sort of bipartisan border bill gets another chance. We'll see. I think that would be a good thing. I think that obviously Republicans have more leeway now because they can control all three of them. So they could get a real border bill done. And that's Donald Trump ran on the border more than anything. So if he doesn't get a border bill done, I'll be like, what are you doing? So, that's it for me. That's my rambling thoughts the day after the election. I am still incredibly tired of getting over this bug that I got. So I apologize for sounding stuffed up and annoying. I'm sure it's not fun. So thanks for joining me on this episode of The Homeless Conservative. I hope that you have enjoyed the election coverage, and I'm actually excited about not talking about the election anymore. I'm excited about talking about real policies and the things that really matter and having more deep dives on specific things and policies and ideas. I that's what I want to do with this. I mean, I'll still talk about the stuff going on in the news for sure, but I'm excited about not talking about the election because the truth is, we didn't know this whole time. It was very tight and polls ended up being wrong. And so there's a lot to talk about still about the election. I'm not saying I'm never going to talk about the election again, but I'm looking forward to talking about more substance and some of the things that I don't feel like the Republican Party is talking about. I think that those are things that I think are important. These are ideas that I've believed in for a long time. So I hope you will join me on that journey. If you enjoy the content or you think someone else might that be they a Republican or a Democrat, maybe it's a Democrat that's sort of disaffected and wants a reasonable Republican source, great, send them my way. You can send them to YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple, any of those things. Share it. I've got a lot of short content on Instagram and shorts on YouTube that you can send them. It's a 1-minute commitment. It's pretty easy. So that'd be a great thing to send them. If you, and then you can also sign up for my email list at thehomelessconservative.com. That way I can keep you updated if I'm doing any kind of like special event or something. So that is it for me. I will catch you next time.